Let's begin with the government's announcement about an hour ago. An increase in petrol tax and lower speed limits on some of the country's most dangerous roads could be on the cards under the government's new transport plans. It's also signalled a major increase to public transport funding, initiatives to encourage walking and cycling, and a cut in funding for state highways. All of this has been laid out in a draft policy statement that the public can respond to over the next month. Our political editor John Patterson was there when the announcement was being made and joins us now live from Parliament. Jane, lovely to have you with us. I know you've only had an hour to digest all of this stuff, but a lot of it is about the ideological differences right around transport between a Labour Greens government and the previous National government.
That's right, John, and much of this information in this draft policy statement on land transport has been well signalled by Labour and the Greens. Of course, much of it was a criticism of the way the National government allocated and prioritised transport spending when it was in government over the 9 years. We'd heard a lot from them, from Labour and the Greens. Now they get the chance in government to put it into practice. So what we're seeing as a result is a much greater spend on public transport. The funding on that will have a 46% increase. There is also a 240% increase for walking and cycling improvements. I must say, though, that's coming off a very low base, so the nominal figure, the increase sounds good, but it's probably not as big as it sounds. Yeah. But also scaling back on state highways, there's going to be an 11% decrease on the money that the government spends on state highway improvements. And under the National government, last year they signalled that spend would roughly be about $9.1 billion over 4 years. Right,
so in monetary terms, an 11% decrease there on roads of national significance is big news. A 240% increase in monetary terms on cycling is not such a big deal. The public transport is the push, isn't it? And also, of course, people will be talking about regional fuel taxes. Now, a regional fuel tax was already signalled pre-election for Auckland. What are we going to see over and above that?
So the news in terms of the petrol tax isn't quite so good for Aucklanders. As you say, the regional fuel tax that is, as the name would suggest, just for Auckland, that kicks on the 1st of July, and that's going to be 10 cents extra per litre for petrol and diesel. Now, Jacinda Ardern and the Transport Minister Phil Twyford have also been signalling a potential 9 to 12 cent a litre increase to basically fund this plan. Now, they also took the opportunity to throw a dig at the former National Party Transport Minister Simon Bridges and the government, and they said that he was considering up to a 20 cent per litre excise tax to fund their transport plans. What we don't know is what he would have decided, of course, but Ms Ardern and Phil Twyford said that the government's looking at the lower end of that for their purposes. So between 9 and 12 cents over 3 years could be put on the price of petrol to fund this plan.
Of course, you increase the tax on petrol and that happens relatively quickly, but the stuff it's paying for, like increased public transport, light rail, takes much longer to see. And so you are selling the idea of this plan, aren't you? Public submissions being sought, interest groups, everyone is allowed to have some kind of input. What reaction would you expect, Jane, to this?
Well, one interesting point of this is the signal that the government wants to double spending on regional and local roads. So their argument is that so much of activity and people's transport happens on those roads rather than what they describe as the wasteful and very selective hand-picked roads of national significance that the government prioritised. So I would expect a pretty good reaction from the regions. Of course, there's always a big demand and a tension between local government spending and central government spending in terms of the upkeep of those roads. So that has been signalled as a priority. And you did mention it, but rail as well, a big aspect of this transport plan. Kiwi Rail will now be also aligned with the Land Transport Funding Fund, the National Land Transport Fund, which Labour had been calling for in opposition. So again, a real signal about the importance of rail. So given Auckland's congestion and potentially in other cities like Wellington, that might be a welcome move as well. But I think people always do respond to any increase in petrol tax, and not always welcome news. But the other aspect of this too, talking about road safety, a major focus of this, and as part of that, the top 10 most dangerous places or roading networks in New Zealand will be reviewed, and a decrease to the speed limit could be looked at in those areas.
Thanks, Jane Patterson, our political editor, who was there. Also there, of course, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, Phil Twyford, the Transport Minister, and interestingly, Shane Jones, New Zealand First now, he was there on behalf of the regions. He's also Associate Transport Minister, but really wearing that regional hat. And the other Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter, from the Greens. So this is very much a coalition policy. It's just out. There will be feedback on it before it is finalised.